WNBA Finals opener is the most watched since league's inaugural year, I believe, in 1997. That means it took nearly 27 years to get to this point. 27 years to get to this point. So they started out on a high, and it's just been...
Alright, so the WNBA Finals Game 1 ratings just dropped, and let me tell you, the WNBA is in serious hot water right now. They're being absolutely exposed for allegedly faking their so-called record-breaking viewership numbers. ESPN was out here proudly proclaiming the opening game snagged the biggest audience in nearly 3 decades, calling it a historic moment for women's basketball. But the moment fans started digging into the data, something felt seriously off.
When are numbers not what the numbers are when you see them? Oh, sure feels like there might be some funny business going on. Is there a little nasty work going on behind the scenes? A little abracadabra bewitched action? Stephanie White knows this one. Yeah, she's conjuring up ratings for the Aces and the Mercury.
Suddenly, social media absolutely exploded. Everyone was saying they heard literally nothing about these finals. Not on sports radio, not on TV, not even online. So, how does a game that barely filled the stands suddenly become this massive ratings blockbuster? Well, get this, reports quickly started popping up, revealing that some new, controversial data methods might have totally juiced the numbers, making the league's success look way bigger than it really was. Now, the real question isn't even about basketball anymore. It's about their credibility. Did the WNBA actually make history? Or did ESPN and league execs just manipulate the story to cover their tracks?
1.9 million viewers with a peak of 2.5 million. ESPN scores most watched Game 1 of the WNBA Finals in 28 years, behind only 1997's single game championship format.
Okay, so when ESPN proudly dropped the news that the WNBA Finals opener was the most watched game in nearly 30 years, the league basically threw a massive party. Social media was flooded with headlines declaring it a historic night for women's basketball, and ESPN's press release bragged about massive growth and record-breaking interest. With 1.9 million viewers reported and a peak of 2.5 million, it honestly sounded like the breakthrough moment everyone had been waiting for. For a league that's battled for attention for decades, this was the dream headline for execs. But hold up, within mere hours, that whole celebration started looking seriously suspicious.
I saw these ratings and went, my first literal response, oh, that's bullshit. My first response. Literally the first thing out of my mouth was, well, that's bullshit.
Fans on social media immediately noticed something super weird. This supposed record-breaking game had barely even registered a pulse in the conversation. There were no trending hashtags, no viral clips, no "did you see that" moments blowing up online. Sports talk shows didn't even touch it. Radio hosts just skipped right over it. What's even crazier, even fans who follow the WNBA closely said they hadn't even realized the finals had started. The disconnect was absolutely glaring. Seriously, how could a game that supposedly pulled in millions of viewers make zero cultural noise?
Nielsen methodology change. A key factor in 2025 is a change in Nielsen's methodology to include big data plus panel, which incorporates out-of-home viewing, a change that generally results in higher reported viewership for all sports broadcasts compared to previous years. Critics argue that some reported year-over-year growth may be partially attributable to this methodological change, which is not always clearly noted in press releases. Of course, not noted in this year's press release.
Bullshit. Then came the bigger, way more important question. Where did these numbers even come from? Analysts started digging deeper and found that ESPN itself had released the data, citing Nielsen metrics, but independent Nielsen reports Nowhere to be seen. Usually Nielsen publicly releases all the official ratings data. This time though, it was just ESPN doing all the talking, and yeah, that definitely raised some eyebrows.
I go listen to sports radio. I'm not getting any WNBA finals. I'll turn on ESPN. I'm not getting any WNBA finals. I'll turn on Fox Sports 1. I'm not getting any WNBA finals. Nowhere I look do I see people really discussing the WNBA finals. And ESPN spits out 1.9 million viewers. Are these silent viewers? They very well may be.
A lot of people started suspecting this record wasn't nearly as authentic as they wanted us to believe, and adding to all the confusion was the mention of a methodology update. Quietly, almost secretly, tucked into the fine print, see, a new Nielsen system called Big Data Plus Panel had rolled out earlier in the year, dramatically expanding what even counts as viewership. Now, it included out-of-home audiences. Think people who might have caught a few seconds of the game in bars, restaurants, gyms, or even airports. Basically, if you were near a screen, you could be counted as a viewer.
How does it happen when literally nobody is talking about the actual finals?
So that meant these numbers weren't just measuring passionate fans actively watching at home. Oh no, they were measuring just total eyeballs, even if they were super passive. This revelation changed absolutely everything. What ESPN was calling a historic night might simply have been the result of a clever counting trick. The host of the Bendo podcast summed it up perfectly, saying, "Are these silent viewers? Because nobody's talking about this game." That line captured exactly how fans felt. This whole supposed ratings boom, it simply didn't reflect reality.
I'm waiting for the official Nielsen ratings. ESPN likes to do some funny math. You can't find those numbers anywhere else. Every AI lists ESPN as the source, not Nielsen. Last time I checked, ESPN isn't in the ratings business. They're reporting their own ratings. Why did it take so long to put this out? I'm suspicious. Amazing for a game that couldn't even sell out.
For years, the WNBA has struggled for any mainstream recognition, and now, finally, the league had this shiny new narrative of success to parade around. But behind all the smiles and glowing press releases, doubts started spreading like wildfire. If this truly was the most watched finals opener since 1997, then why did it feel like absolutely no one saw it? This whole record was quickly starting to look like a complete illusion. It wasn't built on genuine fan engagement, it was built on data manipulation disguised as progress. And once fans started asking questions, the story unraveled at lightning speed. Okay, so if the WNBA Finals really pulled in nearly 2 million viewers, then where in the world was the buzz? Seriously, that's the question fans couldn't stop asking. Normally, when a sporting event shatters ratings records, the reaction is instant and everywhere. Highlights flood social media, talk shows obsess over every moment, news outlets can't stop mentioning it. But this time, crickets. The silence was absolutely deafening. Even major sports networks seemed completely uninterested in their own supposed success story. No big segments, no follow-up coverage, no viral celebration. It felt like a record that existed only on paper. The host of the Bendo podcast nailed it, pointing out he hadn't heard a single mention of the finals on any sports platform. Not ESPN's debate shows, not Fox Sports, not even Twitter. He scrolled through feeds, usually packed with WNBA clips, yet there was barely a trace of excitement. Even the league's most loyal supporters weren't talking about it. This glaring disconnect became the spark that ignited a massive fire of doubt. If this was truly a breakthrough moment, why did it feel invisible? And to make matters worse, fans immediately started comparing it to other sports airing at the same time. NASCAR, college football, MLB playoffs, all had way more visible discussions, even with similar or smaller viewership numbers. This just screamed that either the WNBA audience was unusually quiet, or those millions of supposed viewers simply didn't exist. The numbers and the actual atmosphere just didn't match, and that inconsistency made everyone suspicious. Then the deeper layers started to unravel, and this is where it gets crazy. Analysts quickly noticed that ESPN's grand viewership claims were missing one crucial detail: transparency. The official Nielsen report, which is always used to verify audience numbers, hadn't been released publicly. Instead, the press release cited internal data data and an updated methodology. That alone made tons of people believe ESPN was strategically controlling the narrative. Think about it. ESPN isn't just a broadcaster, they're a huge financial stakeholder in the WNBA's success. If the league looks strong, ESPN rakes in more ad revenue and boosts its own brand credibility. So it hit fans. The silence wasn't accidental, it was controlled. Online forums like Reddit and X threads blew up with people calling out this phantom viewership. Users mocked the idea of ghost fans. Millions of people who supposedly watched the finals but left zero trace of discussion anywhere. Others compared it to those inflated movie box office numbers, where the marketing spin completely overshadows reality. The phrase manufactured success started trending in smaller sports communities. This rapidly growing skepticism put ESPN and the WNBA in such an awkward position. The numbers sounded impressive, sure, but the cultural footprint was microscopic. Fans started demanding to know if the league's credibility was being sacrificed just for the sake of optics. Instead of excitement, there was massive embarrassment. What was meant to be undeniable proof of growth had morphed into a viral example of total distrust. And just as the conversation was heating up, one major revelation finally explained exactly how these silent viewers came to exist. It all pointed back to a hidden change in how ratings were counted. As the confusion swelled, the truth finally surfaced, leading directly back to a quiet but incredibly powerful change inside Nielsen's data system. Early in 2025, Nielsen rolled out a new ratings formula called the Big Data Plus Panel. On paper, it sounded like an innovation designed to capture a fuller picture of audience behavior. In reality, it completely blurred the line between genuine viewership and wildly inflated numbers. This system didn't just measure people actively watching at home anymore. Now it included out-of-home audiences, like those literally glancing at a TV in a bar, a restaurant, an airport, or even a gym. So, if you just passed by a screen showing the game, you might have been counted as part of the WNBA's audience without even realizing it. That one quiet change totally reshaped the entire sports ratings landscape. Suddenly, every major broadcast, from football to tennis, saw spikes in reported viewership. But the biggest beneficiary? The WNBA, a league desperate for any proof of momentum. ESPN and the league's PR teams wasted absolutely no time celebrating these historic numbers, but conveniently forgot to mention that the measurement system itself had changed. It wasn't necessarily that more people cared, it was just that more people were being counted. People immediately called it what it was: statistical inflation. Sports analysts compared it to injecting steroids into the ratings, artificially boosting totals to make leagues look way healthier than they actually are. Even longtime viewers started to question if the WNBA's growth was organic or just engineered through data manipulation. The timing also looked super suspicious. Why did this new system roll out right before the final? And why was ESPN the only outlet reporting these record numbers with such confidence? Industry insiders explained that the big data model blends digital signals from smart TVs and streaming platforms with small panel samples of traditional households. The huge problem is that this formula often overestimates engagement, especially in niche sports. I mean, a bar with 20 people inside could register as 20 viewers, even if only one person was actually paying attention. Multiply that across thousands of venues, and suddenly the WNBA Finals looks like a national event. That's the loophole many fans didn't even know existed. It gave ESPN the perfect cover to release massive numbers while claiming complete honesty. Technically, they weren't lying. They were just telling the version of the truth that benefited them most. And because the updated Nielsen data isn't publicly broken down, there's no easy way to verify it. What began as a simple ratings report turned into a revelation about how easily perception can be shaped by data. The WNBA's so-called record-breaking night wasn't proof of exploding popularity. It was undeniable proof of how modern metrics can disguise reality. But the fallout was only beginning. Once the public realized how these numbers were built, attention quickly turned toward one person whose presence had already transformed the league, and her name was Caitlin Clark. In the middle of this debate over the WNBA's record record-breaking ratings, one name just kept surfacing again and again: Caitlin Clark. Even though she wasn't on the court for this year's finals, her impact was absolutely impossible to ignore. In fact, many argued that the only reason the WNBA had any surge in numbers at all was because of the incredible momentum she created last season. Her arrival brought national headlines, packed arenas, and a flood of new fans who had never watched a women's basketball game before. She became the crucial bridge between college stardom and professional attention, something the league had been missing for decades. But when fans compared this year's finals ratings to Clark's playoff games from the previous season, the truth hit hard. Caitlin's first-round matchup against the Connecticut Sun averaged 2.5 million viewers, higher than the finals opener that ESPN claimed was a historic success. Her peak audience reached 3.4 million, nearly a million more than the 2020. And here's the kicker: those numbers came before Nielsen's big data adjustment, meaning her viewership was authentic. Fans weren't being counted in bars or airports. They were actively tuning in to watch her play. That comparison exposed an uncomfortable reality: the WNBA's biggest draw wasn't the league itself, but one play. Without her, the finals truly struggled to create real buzz. Even with supposedly massive viewership, the league's PR machine wanted to sell the story of collective growth, but the numbers painted a very different picture, one where Caitlin Clark's shadow loomed larger than the entire championship series. Critics pointed out that while ESPN celebrated the finals for hitting 1.9 million viewers, it conveniently avoided mentioning that Clark's games had nearly doubled that figure the year before. Instead, they cleverly shifted the narrative, presenting this year's spike as league-wide momentum, rather than the continuation of a single-player phenomenon. But fans weren't fooled. They saw the pattern. Whenever Caitlin played, engagement skyrocketed. When she didn't, the excitement flatlined. Even some WNBA veterans have reluctantly admitted that Clark changed the game's visibility. She dragged mainstream sports media into the conversation, attracted new sponsors, and boosted merchandise sales across multiple teams. Yet the league's leadership often seems hesitant to credit her directly, fearing it might make the rest of the roster look irrelevant. That hesitation only adds to the growing frustration among fans who see the league benefiting from Clark's popularity while pretending it's organic growth. The finals' inflated ratings were now being viewed through that lens, as an attempt to hide the league's dependence on one player. The so-called record numbers were being used to claim balance and sustainability, when in truth, the WNBA's pulse still beats to Caitlin Clark's rhythm. She is the reason casual fans tuned in, she's the reason advertisers paid attention, and she's the reason people even cared about the sport again. But the deeper analysts dug, the clearer it became that these inflated success stories didn't just glorify the league, they protected its fragile image. And soon, a decade-long comparison of ratings would expose exactly how steep the league's climb had been before Clark ever arrived. When analysts looked beyond ESPN's headlines and actually dug through the last 10 years of WNBA ratings, the trend told a completely different story. From 2015 to 2022, the league's finals audience barely moved, and honestly, most years it actually fell. In 2019, the finals averaged just 238,000 viewers, a record low that many considered rock bottom. Even championship games were buried on ESPN2 or ESPN Dues, networks that typically show replays and talk shows instead of live marquee events. For years, WNBA broadcasts drew smaller audiences than minor college matchups, and sponsors were quietly pulling back. Then, almost overnight, the numbers shot up. By 2023, the finals averaged around 729,000 viewers. In 2024, it jumped again to 1.14, and in 2025, according to ESPN, the finals opener suddenly reached 1.9 million, the biggest spike in nearly 3 decades. To many fans, that kind of jump didn't look natural. It looked manufactured. Critics quickly pointed out the timing. The first major leap came right after Caitlin Clark's record-setting college career made her a national phenomenon. Every Iowa game she played was trending, filling arenas across the country. When she entered the WNBA, that attention followed her. Suddenly, fans who had never cared about the league were tuning in, but not for the WNBA as a whole. They were tuning in for her. Once her rookie season ended, the energy shifted. The playoffs without Caitlin didn't have the same magic. Ticket prices dropped, online mentions fell. Yet somehow, the finals viewership was allegedly higher than ever. That inconsistency raised a major question. How could interest peak when the biggest star wasn't even playing? Critics began comparing the trend line. Before Clark, the WNBA had completely plateaued. After her, ratings rose across the board, from regular season games to playoff matchups. But without her in the spotlight, the numbers looked artificially sustained. The league seemed to be riding the wave she created, while pretending it came from broader growth. ESPN's press release never mentioned her by name, instead celebrating league momentum and growing fan engagement. It was a clever move, a way to keep the focus on the WNBA brand rather than the individual driving it. The 10-year breakdown made the truth impossible to ignore. The WNBA had spent nearly a decade struggling to reach 500,000 viewers. Then Caitlin Clark entered the picture, and viewership nearly tripled. Now, with her season over, the league was desperate to prove that success wasn't temporary. That desperation may have led to creative accounting, using new data methods and strategic marketing spin. This sudden miracle of growth wasn't inspiring, it was suspicious. As more people questioned the numbers, frustration spread beyond social media. Even longtime WNBA supporters started demanding answers. The illusion of progress was cracking, and the next wave of backlash would make it impossible for the league to hide behind press releases. As these so-called record-breaking ratings made headlines, the public started pushing back hard. Sports fans, journalists, and even loyal WNBA supporters began demanding transparency. If the numbers were real, why weren't they backed by an official Nielsen report? Why was ESPN the only one releasing data, and why did it take so long to do it? Those questions absolutely flooded social media, sparking heated debates that the league simply couldn't ignore anymore. The silence from both ESPN and the WNBA only made things worse. Normally, when a sport hits a ratings milestone, the networks celebrate with live interviews, talk show segments, and behind-the-scenes coverage. Instead, this time, both organizations stayed unusually quiet. There were no victory laps, no press conferences, no independent verification. That quietness looked more like damage control than celebration. It made fans feel completely deceived, as if the truth was being buried under PR spin. Online, threads began going viral. Fans started dissecting every single detail of ESPN's statement, comparing it to official Nielsen archives and previous year data. They noticed discrepancies, missing context, unusual phrasing, and selective metrics. The up 62% year-over-year claim, for instance, didn't even specify which games were being compared. Some noticed that ESPN's report used the word average inconsistently, blending peak and total viewership to make the numbers sound big. To many, it looked like marketing manipulation disguised as legitimate statistical reporting. Independent analysts jumped in too. Data trackers from sports business networks pointed out that ESPN's press release lacked the standard Nielsen citation code. Without that, there was no way to confirm the figures. Even veteran commentators who normally defended the WNBA admitted something was off. One called it a manufactured headline to please investors. Another bluntly said, "They're counting ghosts." The phrase "counting ghosts" started trending among fans who no longer trusted the official story. The backlash was especially strong among those who had supported the WNBA through its toughest year. These weren't casual critics, they were loyal followers who had watched the league grow slowly and authentically. They wanted progress, not propaganda. Many felt insulted that the league thought inflated numbers could just replace genuine engagement. The conversation turned from celebration to accountability. People weren't asking how high the ratings were anymore. They were asking who benefited from exaggerating them. Even players felt the ripple effect. Some hinted at frustration on social media, indirectly addressing the chaos without naming names. It became crystal clear that behind the scenes, trust between players, management, and fans was eroding fast. The more the league avoided explaining the numbers, the guiltier it looked. By the end of the week, what was meant to be a victory headline had turned into a full-blown credibility crisis. Fans wanted receipts, they wanted real numbers, verified sources, and proof that the WNBA wasn't manipulating data for attention. But when the answers didn't come, the conversation shifted again. this time to a much deeper issue, whether ESPN's loyalty to the WNBA was creating a media mirage that blurred truth and marketing beyond recognition. As scrutiny intensified, more analysts began connecting the dots between ESPN's interests and the WNBA's image. The deeper they looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about ratings, it was about money, sponsorship, and control. ESPN is one of the WNBA's largest broadcast partners, and its reputation is directly tied to the league's success. When the WNBA looks strong, ESPN's investment looks smart. When it struggles, that partnership looks like a bad bet. Suddenly, the motivation to present a success story made perfect sense. Insiders started describing the situation as a mutual illusion. ESPN needed to show growth to advertisers and investors, while the WNBA needed validation to attract new sponsors and justify expansion. By reporting inflated numbers under the cover of new data methods, both sides got what they wanted, at least temporarily. It created a narrative of progress that looked great on paper, but completely collapsed under basic scrutiny. The network's silence after releasing the ratings wasn't just cautious, it was strategic. By letting the press release stand alone, ESPN avoided direct questioning and allowed the perception of success to spread unchallenged. That strategy worked for a while. Major outlets repeated ESPN's record viewership headline without verifying the data, giving the illusion of widespread success. But when fans began investigating and comparing figures, the truth cracked through. Every article that echoed ESPN's claim suddenly looked complicit in spreading misinformation. This wasn't just a PR blunder, it was a case study on how media power can distort reality. For the WNBA, the short-term boost came at a long-term cost. Fans who once trusted the league's messaging began to doubt everything: attendance figures, sponsorship claims, even player statistics. The credibility the league had slowly built over years of genuine effort was now overshadowed by the perception of dishonesty. Once trust is gone, it's nearly impossible to rebuild. Even within sports journalism, this incident sparked broader questions about integrity. Commentators started asking whether networks that profit from broadcasting leagues should be allowed to report their own rating. If ESPN benefits financially from high numbers, how can it be trusted to publish objective data? The answer, according to most analysts, was simple: it can't. Behind closed doors, executives likely knew the storm was coming. The record-breaking headline had done its job by generating positive attention, but the fallout was exposing a fragile foundation. The WNBA and ESPN found themselves in an awkward position, trapped between their desire for legitimacy and their dependence on spin. The irony was hard to miss. In trying to prove how far the league had come, they'd confirmed just how far it still had to go. Authentic growth doesn't need manipulation, it needs transparency. But that's the one thing both organizations avoided, and as more fans lost faith, the conversation shifted once again. This time, to the person whose shadow still loomed over everything: Caitlin Clark, the one figure whose genuine popularity couldn't be faked or fabricated. As the controversy around the inflated ratings deepened, one truth stood out above everything else: Caitlin Clark had become the WNBA's unintentional mirror. Even when she wasn't playing, her name defined the conversation. Her absence in the finals exposed how fragile the league's appeal truly was. Fans weren't drawn to the finals matchup itself. They were drawn to the idea of Caitlin Clark. Every debate, every online comment, every mention of record viewership inevitably circled back to her, and that reality embarrassed the league's leadership, who seemed determined to downplay her impact while quietly relying on it. During Clark's rookie season, her games brought unprecedented engagement. Ticket prices spiked, merchandise sold out, and every arena she visited looked more like a rock concert than a basketball game. But when the playoffs came and her team exited early, the WNBA's momentum slowed instantly. The finals had the production, the promotion, and the ESPN spotlight, yet something vital was missing: genuine excitement. Without Clark, the league's marketing engine ran, but the spark that ignited public interest had vanished. That's why the record ratings claim was so convenient. It allowed the WNBA to tell a story that didn't rely on Clark's stardom. It suggested the league was thriving as a whole, not just because of one player, but the numbers didn't back that up. Every comparison to Clark's actual viewership exposed how much of the league's recent success existed in her orbit. The finals were supposed to prove that the WNBA could stand on its own, Instead, they proved the opposite. Analysts called it the Caitlin Clark effect. In reverse, when she played, ratings soared. When she didn't, the illusion of growth collapsed. Even players and coaches indirectly acknowledged it, with some expressing frustration that her fame overshadowed the rest of the league. But fans weren't buying the jealousy narrative anymore. They saw the truth. Caitlin Clark wasn't the problem. She was the lifeline. The tension between the league's pride and its dependence on Clark became impossible to hide. On one hand, executives wanted to present a united, successful image. On the other, they couldn't deny that their most valuable asset was a single rookie who had done more to raise visibility than any campaign or commissioner speech ever could. The more they tried to minimize her influence, the more obvious it became that she carried the league's popularity on her shoulders. In the end, the WNBA's attempt to inflate its finals ratings backfired. What was meant to show collective strength only highlighted individual brilliance. Fans realized that Caitlin Clark didn't just boost viewership, she was the viewership. And until the league embraces that truth with transparency and respect, every claim of record success will sound hollow. The numbers might be impressive on paper, but without authenticity, they're nothing more than echoes of the shadow she left behind. The WNBA's attempt to celebrate a historic finals backfired into a credibility nightmare. What was meant to showcase progress instead exposed how fragile the league's foundation truly is. The inflated numbers, the lack of transparency, and the eerie silence surrounding the so-called record all pointed to one truth: perception had replaced authenticity. ESPN and league executives wanted a success story so badly that they built one out of technicalities and selective reporting, but fans noticed. They questioned, investigated, and uncovered the flaws hidden beneath the celebration. At the center of it all stood Caitlin Clark, the one player whose genuine popularity couldn't be fabricated. Her shadow reminded everyone what real engagement looks like. The WNBA doesn't need manipulated statistics. It needs honesty, trust, and transparency, because no amount of clever data can replace the power of genuine connection between fans and the game they love.